Seasonic, the heart of your system.
Hi guys, it's Silas from Kit Guru, and today I'll be taking a look at the Deepcool GAMMAXX L240. Starting with the basics, a quick look through the cooler spec and what's included on paper, it does become clear that Deepcool have developed the GAMMAXX L240 to be a more budget-oriented entry-level AIO cooler. And it does carry an entry-level price at £59.99. This being said, Deepcool have managed to include quite a bit of value at this price point. Not only a clean black aesthetic and backlit CPU block, but also full RGB lighting with support for all of the most popular motherboard lighting software suites. Now recently I was fortunate enough to be able to test a similar cooler from Silverstone, the 240mm TD02 RGB. With both coolers sharing a very similar sort of £60 price point, it'll be really interesting to see how they both compare in features and performance in our testing. Opening up the box, packaging looks secure enough, and inside we find a set of installation instructions, mounting hardware for all current AMD and Intel sockets, two 120mm fans, a couple of cables for connecting everything up, and of course the cooler itself. Taking a look at the included 120mm fans, it's a little bit clearer that some cost saving has been employed. The plastic frames for the fans do feel a little bit cheap, with a small amount of flex to them when you really put them under pressure. You also won't find any braiding on the cables or even rubber or foam isolation pads to help with vibration dampening. Both fans feature a 9-blade design and speeds between 500 and 1800 RPM. Having a look at the fans' connections, kind of expected but still good to see a 4-pin PWM connection and a 3-pin proprietary connection for the RGB LEDs, of which there are 6 ultra bright ones built into each fan. Although not super premium, I'd imagine they would get the job done. In terms of adapters and cables provided, it's a bit interesting. Firstly, it's worth noting that a standalone controller for the advertised RGB lighting isn't included with the GAMMAXX L240. As you do receive a 4-pin RGB LED internal header cable, this isn't catastrophic, and just with the TD02 RGB from Silverstone, which retails at the same sort of £60 price point, seems to be necessary to keep the price low and the cooler accessible. This being said, rather than including a simple PWM fan splitter, you actually receive a rather fancy 4-port Pwm Fan Hub instead. Not a massive issue, but personally I would have preferred even a very basic controller and a simple 2-fan splitter rather than the nicer fan hub and no controller. I certainly appreciate that the majority of motherboard manufacturers now include RGB headers on their boards, but the GAMMAXX L240's price suggests it would be well suited to an entry-level or a first-time builder, someone who might miss the fact that an internal RGB header is required. To get both the fans and CPU block LEDs connected up, a 3-pin proprietary splitter is included, with space to accommodate up to 4 RGB devices, and as only 3 are occupied out of the box, there is still a little bit of room for expansion, which is still really nice to see. Taking the cooler out of the box, it does feel a little bit lightweight, but immediately it struck me how similar the CPU block looks to the Deepcool Castle 240. It's a similar kind of like Fez style pump, just a little bit shorter with a mirrored reflective top and the GAMMAXX logo stealthed away. It's almost like the smaller brother to the Castle 240, still featuring braided tubing as well. It is nice to see that although some sacrifices have been made with the L240, they're kind of only in areas which aren't really super noticeable. Attention has been given to the parts of the cooler you are more likely to see through your system's windows, such as the CPU block and the cooler's tubing. There are a couple of connections running from the CPU block, one 3-pin RGB connection for the block's built-in lighting, just as with the fans, and a 3-pin pump power cable. With everything unpacked, we can move on to installation, starting with the backplate. First you need to locate the correct mounting holes for your socket. As we test on the Z170 platform, installation of course will be reflecting this. 4 long mounting screws can then be passed through the backplate, and you can lock them into place with the 4 included plastic retention clips. With the screws firmly in place, you can install the backplate onto the rear of your motherboard. The cooler itself also needs a little bit of preparation. There are 2 sets of brackets, one for Intel and one for AMD, which need to be installed directly onto the CPU block with the included very small screws. With these brackets installed, you can apply some thermal compound, a small single service kind of packet is included, place the CPU block atop your CPU and start tightening it down with the 4 included thumb screws. The mounting screws are not threaded the whole way, so once the thumb screws no longer turn freely, that's it, you're done. Short and long radiator screws are included for installing the fans and the radiator as well. Connecting up all of the cables is also pretty nice and easy. You connect both the fans to the included hub and then connect that to your motherboard CPU fan header. And the 3-pin pump power cable can be connected to the CPU opt header. Both the fans and the CPU block's 3-pin LED connections can also be plugged into the included adapter and then to your motherboard's 4-pin RGB header. As our test motherboard doesn't support an RGB header, I paired the cooler with a simple 4-pin RGB controller, one that I had lying around. Installation is pretty straightforward, but the included instructions with nice large images are always to hand if you do run into any trouble. With the cooler installed and everything plugged in, we can move on to some testing. At KitGuru we test CPU coolers on the Z170 platform, and for our CPU we are testing with the Intel Core i7-7700K installed on an ASUS Z170 Pro Gaming motherboard. For RAM we have a single 8GB stick of Geil EVO X RGB for some added bling, and that's running at 3200 MHz. Storage is handled by a 120GB SanDisk SSD Plus, and powering our bench is a Seasonic Prime Platinum 650W PSU. When testing we take a number of readings with the i7-7700K's turbo locked in at 4GHz, overclocked to 4.5 GHz and at 5 GHz as well, to really kind of increase that thermal limit. The temperatures taken are all delta T values, meaning we subtract the ambient temperature from the CPU temperature. More details of our full testing methodology can of course be found on kitguru.net. And so, on to the results. Starting at our stock 4 GHz, unfortunately the GAMMAXX L240 is nestled in with a number of air coolers towards the bottom of our rankings. At 37.5 degrees, it sits quite close to both the GamerStorm Captain 240 Pro and Captain 240 RGB EX, but the closest competition on price certainly is the Silverstone TD02 RGB, and that does perform a little bit better at 34.7 degrees. At 4.5 GHz, I did notice that the L240's fans basically ramp up all the way to full speed, suddenly much more audible, and stay there. This did lead to some more impressive temps, 56.5 degrees, and sees the GAMMAXX L240 actually overtake the Silverstone TD02 RGB. It was a similar trend with our 5 GHz testing as well. There wasn't any real audible difference in fan noise, so at 5 GHz the L240 fans' RPM was basically exactly the same. Even at this higher overclock though, the GAMMAXX L240 still sat in a similar position just above the TD02 RGB. Idle temps at 14.7 degrees were a little bit higher though when compared to previously tested coolers. Noise levels were actually a bit of a surprise though. Initially when the L240's fans span up, I was a bit taken aback by how audible they were. Only after checking with a sound meter, it became apparent that although kind of loud to my ear, not quite as much as the TD02 RGB. Although still loud, it's impressive to see that the GAMMAXX L240 could achieve better temps with our 4.5 and 5 GHz overclocks, whilst also reducing audible noise by 3.7 dBA. Checking out the lighting, as mentioned, rather than configuring through software, an inline controller was used to get a sense of the different effects and the colours. After powering up our test bench for the first time, I have to say, wow, the LEDs are super bright. With a lot of coolers tested previously, you really only get a sense of the lighting in a dim room or with the lights turned kind of completely off. But with the GAMMAXX L240's lights, they still shone through super clear even in much brighter conditions. The included fans do glow really well and actually transition from colour to colour pretty smoothly. The lighting on the CPU block also projects the GAMMAXX logo really well. Although bright, not over the top, and not a full wall of colour like the addressable RGBs on some coolers like the Castle 240. Playing around with some effects, strobing and breathing look really good. The GAMMAXX L240 does include full support for ASUS Aura Sync, Gigabyte RGB Fusion, MSI Mystic Lighting Sync, and ASRock's Polychrome Sync as well. So to summarise, the GAMMAXX L240 does show that you can get quite a bit for your money, and is still really feature rich even though it's at an entry level price. Personally, I think the cooler looks really good, and I'm a big fan of the discrete CPU block that really comes alive when you power up your system. Lighting is just, well, bright, really bright, so bright. This cooler could realistically do a really good job of lighting up your whole system basically by itself. With performance, the L240 even handled higher temperatures well, albeit a little bit loudly, and does even offer some scope for overclocking. Looking at the full kit, there are clearly a few areas Deepcool have had to cut back, things like the lack of controller and quality maybe of the included fans, but impressively they have managed to retain some more desirable features like the braiding on the tubing, things you would actually see and appreciate. Overall, the Deepcool GAMMAXX L240 is actually a really solid cooler. It's perfect for a first time builder or water cooler. So thanks for checking out this review of the Deepcool GAMMAXX L240, and make sure to leave a like or dislike, and feel free to drop a comment below with your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this video and haven't got round to it already, you can always click the subscribe button below to check out more videos from KitGuru, and while you're at it, Click the bell icon for notifications as soon as videos go live. If you're interested in seeing videos before anybody else, we've recently opened up a Patreon page, so feel free to click the link below to find out how to see these videos before anybody else. Or even check out our merch store to pick up a case for your phone, or maybe even a hoodie to keep yourself warm. I've been Silas from Kit Guru, and I will see you in the next one.